March 3rd, 1943. New Georgia Island, Solomon Islands. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hissed down through the palm canopy like static, turning the foxholes into brown pits of despair. Corporal Tadao Matsumoto, 19th Infantry Regiment, sat crouched under his soaked poncho, clutching his Arisaka rifle and staring at the lifeless American body lying just a few yards ahead. The jungle smelled of mud, cordite, and death. When the gunfire finally faded, Matsumoto's platoon crept forward. They'd ambushed a small U.S. patrol, 4 men caught while trying to cut through the undergrowth with machetes. 3 Americans were dead. 1 had crawled off into the bush and vanished. But what caught Matsumoto's eye wasn't the rifles. It wasn't even the strange rubber-soled boots or the tan webbing the Americans wore. It was the small olive-green boxes scattered near their bodies, dented and stamped with bold black letters. U.S. Army Field Ration, Type C. Private Sakamoto leaned close. "Food," he whispered. Matsumoto nodded. Their rations had been rice balls laced with salt, cold, sticky, and molding in the humidity. They'd long since run out of pickled plum. The company cook had been killed 2 days earlier. So when they found the American boxes, curiosity burned hotter than hunger. The corporal opened one with the tip of his bayonet. Inside, miraculously dry despite the rain, were small tins and packets wrapped in waxed paper. Labels printed in English, meat and beans, chopped ham and eggs, soluble coffee, sweet chocolate, dextrose base. Sakamoto's eyes widened. Chocolate? Coffee? "Don't touch yet," Matsumoto said. It could be poison. But he couldn't resist the smell. When he pried open the can of meat, a rich, savory aroma rose up. Grease, salt, and something decadent, something unthinkable out here in the jungle. The Japanese soldiers passed it around, each sniffing, each taking a bite. It was soft, rich, foreign. Sakamoto muttered, half in awe. They eat like kings. That night, they lit no fire, fearing aircraft patrols. But each man quietly sucked on a piece of American chocolate, letting it melt slowly in his mouth. The sweetness was overwhelming, almost painful after months of tasteless rice. For a moment, they forgot the rain. Matsumoto lay awake long after the others slept. The chocolate still lingered on his tongue. If this is how the enemy eats, he thought, how can we ever win? Morning came with a chorus of insects and the distant rumble of artillery. The Americans had withdrawn during the night, leaving behind a trail of spent cartridges and boot prints. Corporal Matsumoto's platoon scavenged what they could: ammunition, bandages, and more of those strange olive-drab ration boxes. They gathered under the jungle canopy, opening each tin like archaeologists, uncovering relics of a civilization far beyond their own. "Look at this," muttered Sergeant Nakamura, holding up a small packet marked "Instant Coffee, add hot water." His tone carried disbelief. They even drink luxury in the field. For the Japanese soldier, food was ritual. Boiled rice, barley, sometimes dried fish, occasionally a preserved umeboshi plum. Meals were uniform, austere, born of scarcity and discipline. It was not uncommon for units to survive on half rations, or forage for edible roots when supply ships were sunk by American submarines. But here, in their hands, was abundance in metal. Private Sakamoto unwrapped a packet of cigarettes from the ration box, his fingers trembling slightly. "Camels," he read aloud, his Japanese accent heavy on the English word. The men passed the cigarettes around like sacred offerings, lighting them carefully, inhaling the foreign smoke. The taste was smoother than the harsh, locally rolled tobacco they carried. For a few minutes, the jungle haze thickened not with fear, but with quiet wonder. It's not just food, Nakamura said. It's power. Matsumoto looked at the neat English lettering stamped into the cans. Precise, uniform, mass-produced. Each one identical. The Americans could feed an army this way. Every soldier, anywhere, could open a can and taste home. He thought of the Imperial Army supply lines, the endless bamboo baskets carried through rain, the horses dying in the mud, the cooks rationing rice by handfuls. He remembered his training at Yokohama, where an instructor had told them, "The spirit of the Japanese soldier is our greatest weapon." But now, as he stared at those tins of meat and beans, Matsumoto felt something twist deep inside him. Maybe spirit alone could not fight factories. Later that day, while patrolling the riverbank, they came upon a shattered American jeep half submerged in the mud. Inside were more crates, not of ammunition, but food. Powdered milk, canned fruit cocktail, even chewing gum. Chewing gum. Sakamoto unwrapped a piece and began to chew awkwardly, unsure whether to swallow. "Sweet," he mumbled, his jaw working slowly, like sugar that never ends. The sergeant laughed, the first time in weeks. "You look ridiculous." "Maybe," Sakamoto said, grinning. "But the Americans aren't ridiculous too. They go to war with candy." That night, as they divided the spoils, the mood was strange, not joyful, not grateful, but unsettled. They could feel, even if they could not articulate it, that these tins and packets meant something larger than food. In every can, they saw a reflection of what they lacked: industry, comfort, consistency. And in every bite, a haunting realization crept closer: that this war was not just being fought with rifles and bravery, but with ships, machines, and supply chains that could reach across the ocean. When Matsumoto wrote in his field diary that evening, his words were brief, smudged by the rain. "The enemy eats like gods. We eat like ghosts." The entry would never be mailed home. Far across the Pacific, 6,000 miles from that soaked jungle outpost, a very different kind of war was being fought, not with rifles, but with wrenches, conveyor belts, and coffee pots. April 1943, Chicago, Illinois. In the bowels of the Wilson Packing Company, 1,000 women in kerchiefs and aprons stood shoulder to shoulder along a production line. The air reeked of grease, metal, and steam. Cans rattled, labels hissed through rollers, lids clanged shut in rhythm like a mechanical heartbeat. Every minute, the line produced another 100 meat and beans. Every hour, another 1,000 chopped ham and eggs. A foreman shouted over the din, "Keep it moving, ladies. These are headed for the Pacific." This was the other front, the one Corporal Matsumoto could never see. While Japanese factories struggled to smelt enough steel for ships, American canneries, bakeries, and coffee roasters had become extensions of the battlefield. In 1942, the U.S. Quartermaster Corps had standardized the C-Ration, a self-contained meal for soldiers in the field. Each unit included a main course: crackers, coffee, sugar, salt, candy, and cigarettes. Enough calories to fuel a man for a day. Enough familiarity to remind him of home. In Tokyo, meanwhile, rationing had stripped the population to bare essentials. White rice was a luxury. Sweet potatoes, barley, and millet-filled mess bowls. Japanese troops were taught to eat for endurance, not pleasure. Their rations, often spoiled by humidity or insects, reflected a nation stretched thin across an empire it could barely feed. In contrast, America's factories ran day and night, electric lights burning even at midnight. The War Production Board had converted every resource into a weapon of logistics. Hershey's factories were turning out chocolate not for children, but for soldiers, specially formulated to withstand tropical heat. Maxwell House roasted millions of pounds of coffee beans every month, vacuum-sealed and stamped with "For troops only." It wasn't just about calories. It was about morale. An American rifleman could fight through exhaustion because he knew when the shooting stopped, he'd open a can and taste something normal, something human. To the Japanese soldier, eating was survival. To the American soldier, eating was home. And so, when Matsumoto's platoon found those tins in the mud, they weren't just uncovering food. They were touching the industrial pulse of a nation that could outproduce and outlast any empire on Earth. Sergeant Nakamura didn't know about the assembly lines. He didn't know that American factories were running on shifts of women who'd left their homes, their husbands overseas, their hands blistered from endless work. But when he held up that can under the moonlight, listening to the soft, metallic click of its lid, he could feel it. The weight of something vast, organized, unstoppable. Later that night, the corporal wrote another line in his diary. The enemy's strength is not in spirit. It is in their abundance. Even their machines feed them. By dawn, the rain returned. The cans were empty, the wrappers buried in the mud. But the realization lingered, heavier than any weapon they carried. The Japanese Empire had conquered territory. America had conquered supply. June 1943. Kolombangara Island, Solomon Sea. The jungle no longer felt alive. It breathed like a dying animal, wet, heavy, and filled with the stench of rot. Flies gathered around the makeshift latrines, and the once disciplined ranks of the Imperial Japanese Army had been reduced to hollow-eyed silhouettes. Corporal Matsumoto crouched beside a fallen palm, carefully dividing what was left of their rice. It wasn't much. A small tin cup for 5 men. They mixed it with boiled rainwater to stretch the illusion of fullness. Around them, men coughed, scratched at mosquito bites, and muttered in half-sleep. Their uniforms were stained black from mildew. Their belts hung looser by the week. But even here, far from the front lines, the Americans were close, their presence felt in the faint rumble of naval guns offshore, in the distant hum of engines above the clouds, and in the empty C-Ration tins scattered across the jungle floor like silent mockery. Private Sakamoto picked one up, rusted now, the label still faintly legible. Meat and vegetable hash. He turned it over in his hands, jaw tightening. "Everywhere we go," he muttered. "These things are waiting." It wasn't just envy anymore. It was disbelief turned to dread. Weeks earlier, when they first found the rations, it had been curiosity, even fascination. But now it was humiliation. These cans seemed to multiply faster than bullets. Wherever American forces landed, Guadalcanal, New Georgia, Rendova, they left behind mountains of food, each stamped with identical markings, each a declaration of power. To the Japanese, the enemy seemed infinite. Sergeant Nakamura spat into the mud. "They fight with their stomachs. We fight with our souls." But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction, because everyone knew the truth. Hunger erodes even the strongest spirit. Matsumoto thought back to basic training, to the lectures about Yamato Damashi. The Japanese spirit said to make their army invincible. "Endure all hardship," the instructors had said. "Victory comes to those who suffer the longest." But as he watched his comrades gnaw on strips of bark, trying to quiet the ache in their stomachs, That phrase began to sound like a cruel joke. One evening, after a rainstorm, they raided an abandoned American position. The foxholes were empty, the sandbags torn open. But inside the dugouts, they found piles of discarded supplies, unopened rations, cans of peaches, packets of crackers still sealed. The men froze. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sakamoto lunged forward, tearing into a can with his knife. Syrupy peaches spilled out, golden, glistening in the fading light. He scooped them with trembling fingers, laughing, crying, choking. "It's like eating the sun," he shouted. The others followed, greedily consuming the fruit until the ground was littered with empty tins. The sweetness made their throats burn, but none of them cared. Afterward, in silence, they stared at the wrecked American camp. Everything, the tents, the crates, the food, spoke of a country that could afford to leave comfort behind and never look back. For the first time, Matsumoto understood something he would never say aloud. Japan could not win this war. Not against an enemy that treated abundance as waste. When night fell, he opened his notebook again and wrote the words that would never be read by anyone else. They have so much. They do not notice what they lose. We have so little, and still it slips through our fingers. This is not a war of courage anymore. It is a war of who can eat. He tore the page out and buried it with the empty cans. Because admitting such thoughts was treason, but he felt deep down that the war itself had already betrayed them. October 1943. Bougainville. The American invasion began before dawn. From the black horizon, the sea erupted with flashes of white. Naval guns hammering the beaches in endless rhythm. Palm trees splintered, sand turned to mist, and the jungle convulsed under fire. Corporal Matsumoto huddled in a shallow trench as the bombardment rolled inland like thunder. He'd been fighting for nearly 2 years now, but never had he seen firepower like this. Even before the first landing craft touched shore, he could smell the enemy. Diesel, gun oil, salt, and something faintly sweet. The smell of their rations. When the shelling stopped, the waves brought the Americans ashore. Thousands of them, perfectly equipped, fresh uniforms, shiny helmets, radios that actually worked. They carried flamethrowers, mortars, and most strangely, boxes. Boxes stamped with the same lettering Matsumoto now knew by heart. By nightfall, the jungle was a maze of fire and shadows. The Japanese positions fell one after another. Matsumoto's unit retreated deeper inland, scavenging what they could. But the farther they fled, the more they found the same haunting evidence. Half-buried crates of C-Rations, neatly stacked near supply dumps, some still sealed. One soldier muttered in disbelief, "They feed their men faster than we can bury ours." It wasn't just on the ground. In the sky above Bougainville, American C-47 transport planes droned in endless patterns, parachuting food and ammunition to their troops. Each chute opened like a white flower in the sun, a symbol of a nation that could resupply its men anywhere on Earth. By contrast, Japan's supply convoys were dying at sea. Allied submarines lurked along every route from Rabaul to Truk, sinking freighters faster than they could sail. Entire divisions were stranded, starving on islands they'd once captured in triumph. An American logistics officer later said, "We didn't just outfight them, we outfed them." And it was true. For every Japanese soldier gnawing on moldy rice or searching for coconuts, an American Marine somewhere was opening a can of meat stew and lighting a cigarette. The difference in calories was the difference in endurance. That invisible war, the one of logistics and appetite, was being won long before bullets reached their mark. Matsumoto's unit, now less than 30 men, stumbled upon a destroyed American depot 2 weeks later. The air still smelled of smoke and diesel. The crates inside were blasted open, their contents spilling like treasure. Tinned fruit, sugar packets, powdered coffee. The men fell on them like animals. Some cried as they ate. Others stuffed their uniforms with whatever they could carry. Matsumoto didn't eat. He just stared at the stenciled words on the side of a crate. Packed by Heinz Company, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was strange. Those words meant nothing to him, yet they felt enormous. A window into a machine of a nation that seemed to exist only to feed its army. In Japan, his mother worked in a textile factory, spinning thread for uniforms that might never reach the front. Here, on this forgotten island, Matsumoto was surrounded by proof that his enemies' mothers were feeding theirs with an empire of factories, rails, and ships. That night, he thought of home, of his father's rice field, now likely flooded and barren from requisition. He imagined American farmers somewhere in the Midwest, filling silos so tall they touched the clouds. For the first time, he saw the true scale of this war. It wasn't just nations fighting. It was systems. Spirit versus machinery. Tradition versus industry. And somewhere between those two forces, human hunger had become the truest measure of victory. February 1944. Rabaul, New Britain. The jungle had become a prison. What once echoed with the cries of battle now carried only the low, pitiful moans of hunger. The fortress of Rabaul, once Japan's proud bastion in the South Pacific, was dying from the inside out. Corporal Tadao Matsumoto could barely recognize his reflection in the pool of rainwater beside his foxhole. His cheeks were hollow, his uniform shredded, his boots long since replaced by strips of canvas. The once glorious 19th Infantry Regiment had withered to fragments. Men who looked more like shadows than soldiers. Every few days, American planes appeared overhead, their contrails white against the blue sky. They didn't even bother to bomb anymore. They didn't have to. Rabaul had been cut off for months, encircled by sea, starved of supply. The Americans had decided to let hunger do the work of bullets. The rations were gone. The rice was gone. Even the rats were gone. And yet, every now and then, they'd find traces of the enemy. A washed-up crate, an empty can drifting ashore, a wrapper carried by the wind. And every time they did, the men would stare as if they'd found some holy relic. One afternoon, while scavenging along the coast, Matsumoto found something wedged between the rocks, an intact C-Ration can, its lid rusted but sealed. His hands trembled as he pried it open with his bayonet. Inside, canned pork and beans. The smell hit him like a memory of another world, thick, savory, alive. He divided it with his men, spooning tiny portions into each trembling hand. No one spoke. They ate slowly, reverently, as if afraid the flavor might vanish if they chewed too quickly. When it was over, they just sat there, staring at the empty can, silent except for the surf. Private Sakamoto whispered, "They don't even know this was here." Matsumoto nodded. "They can lose food like we lose men." He turned the can over, tracing the words stamped into the bottom. U.S. Army, 1943. The letters felt like they belonged to another species, a civilization built on metal and endless motion. In that moment, the corporal understood something no order or broadcast had ever taught him. Japan's soldiers might have fought with courage beyond measure. But courage alone could not refill a stomach. He thought of the American soldiers, boys who could march with full bellies, write letters home with pencils made in factories, drink hot coffee in the middle of war. Their confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet certainty of a nation that could always make more. More planes, more guns, more food, more everything. The Emperor's portrait in Matsumoto's pack suddenly felt small, fragile, a symbol of a world that could no longer compete with the hum of American machinery across the ocean. As night fell, he heard a plane far above, a B-24, its engines steady and endless. He watched its faint lights drift across the sky like a moving constellation, free of fear, free of want. And for the first time, he did not feel anger. He felt awe. He whispered to himself, not as a soldier, but as a man. They fight with factories. We fight with faith. And faith cannot be eaten. A wind moved through the palms. Somewhere out at sea, another American convoy was surely unloading. Crates of ammunition, medicine, and millions of cans of food destined for men who would never know hunger. Meanwhile, on the blackened shores of Rabaul, Matsumoto closed his eyes and listened to his stomach growl beneath the sound of distant engines. A requiem for an empire built on endurance, undone by hunger. The can, polished clean, lay beside him in the dirt. He would keep it, not as a trophy, but as a truth. When the war ended and he finally returned to Japan, he still had it. A rusted C-Ration tin, carried across the ocean, sitting quietly on a shelf in his home. Visitors would ask what it was. He'd only smile faintly and say, "That is how I knew we had lost."